Welcome to Manhwa Recaps, spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The manhwa starts with a man saying that his mother said no matter how hard life gets, to dream big. Shoot for the moon, and hit the stars, and that he'd eventually become the protagonist of his life. We see him vomiting blood, he looks down at his feet. He asks if this is where he'll die, and has a hole in his chest. He explains how it was caused by a cursed spear, so it cannot be healed normally, only an elixir might save him. But of course he doesn't have any. We hear multiple sets of footsteps as a group pulls up to him. They make eye contact. And the man says, "Hey Choi Doyoon." Doyoon says he could have defeated him without his help. The man laughs saying of course. Doyoon asks him what's funny and he says that's exactly what he thought he would say. He thinks about how he worked his ass off to get here, and teamed up with this psychopath for his own survival. But to think he would die saving him. We see people hugging each other out of joy. Then the man asks Doyoon if he has an elixir, he says he does. The man says he won't use it on him, will he? Doyoon says the value of an elixir is extremely high, so he's saving it for himself, as the man isn't valuable enough to use it on. The man laughs, then says this is a messed up world. He explains how divine spirits, just gonna call them constellations, watch over humanity and their struggles as entertainment. While giving them trials and rewards, they found Doyoon's sadistic side entertaining and didn't care about a mob character like him. He says nobody cared about him. He starts to curse the world and the constellations, also cursing Doyoon, who says that's quite harsh. We finally learn the man's name is Kang Yu-yoon. Doyoon asks why he tried to fight, saying all he usually does is provide intel. Yu-yoon says that he was tired of leeching off him, and it's just his limit. Doyoon asks if it was to save the civilians, then a floating figure appears in the sky. They are called tellers, and they guide humanity to its end, and sold them over to the constellations. The teller says amazing, and that they've done very well. He says they'll be looking forward to the next trial, and with the end being close to do their best. Yu-yoon tells Doyoon to do his best, and to leave with his little minions. One of the girls gets angry, and the other tells her to ignore him. Yu-yoon laughs asking if they feel sad about him dying. But they all just turn around and begin to walk away. He tells them goodbye, then feels a sharp pain and begins to spit up blood. He says he failed to become the main character of his own life, and spent his life living as a mob character, who had no choice but to live in the main character's shadow. He wonders what he's living for, and says if he was given another chance he'd fix this regret. And that he'd climb higher than anyone else, so high that he'd not envy anyone else, and be proud. That's how he wanted to live. He closes his eyes, then plot convenience ensues. He opens them, seeing little white things, wondering where he is. He looks down and realizes he's become a little blob dude. He yells asking what the hell these creatures are, then a voice says it seems like everyone is here. We see a teller with a deer skull. He says he'll explain to them all their situation. He says they'll be working as tellers of the Celestial Body Incorporated. They are all here to prove their skills. Yu-yoon wonders what the hell is going on. Deer Skull Man says the explanation ends here, then creates a rift in the floor. He tells them all to show them what they've got. Yu-yoon starts to freak out, asking if the guy is trying to kill them all. A status window appears, saying activating Genesis blessing, and he gets an aura around him that allows him to breathe. Then he sees he has a mission that says he needs to enter a contract or else he will die, and he has an hour. He says this is hecked up, having only an hour to do this random mission. He then realizes he's actually in space, and Earth is right below him. He wonders how it looks perfectly fine after being destroyed. He says he definitely died, but was reincarnated as a teller. He decides to just focus on the mission. He says if it's the past then this is when the collectors were active. After the gates appeared and monsters poured out, they were the people who hunted the monsters down. Typical dungeon manhwa boys. He says he needs to pick a collector that didn't have a contract, and says it's strange since collectors need to enter a contract with a teller to receive a sponsorship from the constellations. Or else they can't get points, meaning that any collector was desperate for a contract. So this is way too easy of a mission right now. He opens a map and tries to press where he wants to go, but says it's short since he has little baby arms. He then realizes he doesn't even have fingers, he just has little nubs. Then something begins to change, and it jumps to Deer Skull judging them all, saying it seems like it won't be any fun since none of them are picking up on the situation. Then he notices that Yu-yoon is changed into his body. Yu-yoon wonders if it's because he wished for it, but says that isn't important. Then he clicks soul and teleports. The rest wonder how he did that, and ask what happened. Deer Skull is sweating hard, saying that normally takes 2 to 4 weeks. But with the magic of plot armor, Yu-Yun only needed 3 minutes. He quickly decides this mission won't be boring. We're then taken to Seoul. Yu-Yun peeks out of an alley, and wonders where exactly he landed. Plot convenience ensues that he landed right at the Collector Association. He says he needs to quickly find one, and he looks at the minimap, realizing that the red dots must be in contracts, while blues aren't. He says if his assumptions are correct, who he contracts with is important, since if he signs someone who is weak then he'll get no attention from the constellations. He says it's gonna be a high bar to make. Then a security guard appears, asking him if he's a collector. Yu-Yun says he's looking for someone and not to interrupt him. The man grabs his shoulder, saying only those allowed may enter here. The Genesis system activates, and shocks the hell out of the man. The security guard asks him if he's a teller, then apologizes saying he thought he was a human, and runs off saying he's sorry. Yu-Yun says this treatment really hammers the fact he's in the past, but says whatever and heads out. He then sees a window appearing showing people's names and ages. He says this won't help him with the mission at all, since he can't grab every collector and interview them. Then he spots books above their heads, wondering if they cannot see them. He says it's not from the Genesis system, so maybe it's his own exclusive skill. He only has 37 minutes left, then imagines himself pulling one of the books, and it works. He quickly starts to read it, and is surprised. He gets excited saying this is overpowered. And he's certain about what the skill is now. Back to the deer skull, he's looking at the timers for all of the tellers he sent out, and says only one is left. He says he was excited since he transformed early, but with only a minute left he's basically lost. It jumps back to Yu-Yun staring at a girl eating noodles, and she's scared asking how he got in and who he is. She says she'll call the cops if he doesn't leave. He doesn't respond, so she asks if he's even listening. He sees a shining book above her head, and he says found you. He explains that he lives in a mixed world, which is where ideas can become reality, such as myths and so on. He flashbacks to when he realized what his ability was. And it tells him not only about the person's abilities, but also how they've lived. He wonders if there's a book like that for himself, but quickly realizes there isn't. He says it's a bit sad, then wonders what the different colors mean. So he grabs another one. He says so far he's only seen bronze and silver books, so surely a gold one exists too. And how the aura on the book shows the person's innate ability and potential. So if the book is bronze, but has a silver aura, that person can become silver. He says this is amazing, and says he just needs to find who has the most potential. He teleports, saying he'll be able to find one surely. But after a bit, with only 10 minutes left, he is yet to find anyone. He realizes the timer is running out, and says he won't settle for anything that isn't gold. Then he asks a random girl what year it is. She tells him. And he wonders who is a collector that isn't famous yet. And he says there were some called the Miraculous Three, Saint Bang Sang, Flame Knight Quan Inbim, and Sword Empress Kang Hyerim. He says with Bang Song's identity being a mystery he won't be able to find them. And Inbim is still in the States, so the only one left is Hyerim. She was the strongest of the three, and remained unknown at the start of her career. He teleports, then looks around wondering why she's living in such a filthy place. He sees her eating noodles and calls out to her. She's startled, and of course we know how this went. Now we're caught up. He confirms that she's Hyerim. He tells her he's a teller and introduces himself, and how he came to make a contract with her. She's surprised, and he wonders if he chose the right person, since she's so excited. He tells her yes, he came to make one with her. She says that her abilities are bad and she cannot fight. He asks her who said such nonsense. She says that everyone around her has always said this, and told her to give up on being a collector. He says it makes sense that she's living like this, since she doesn't know her talent. He tells her they only said those things since they don't know how great her ability is. She asks if he's serious, and he says of course he's a teller so she can believe him. He says he'll help unleash her potential, and just needs her to sign. She reads it, asking if she'll be a collector. He tells her yes. She wonders where she left her pen, then he pulls one out quickly. She starts to sign it, and seems excited saying it's done. We see he only had 2 seconds left, but then gets a window saying he'll be promoted to a full-time employee. He smiles, saying he'll live this life to the fullest. He tells her he's looking forward to working with her. She's still hella excited. He explains that in the future she's very noble, so people said she was from a rich family. But it's weird seeing how different she is. He pulls the book from over her head, and begins to read it. Then he's surprised to see she has 3 specializations. He says one of them is the story of Chik Young Yong, folklore guy maybe. He just says he can't believe she has 3 talents that are this strong, and if she can awaken all of them she'll be a monster. He says Miss Hiram, and she says you're Mr. Teller. He tells her to just call him by his name. Then asks about her talents. She says she knows they are bad talent. She says during basic training they were all instructed not to talk about their talents. He tells her they are in a contractual relationship. She says her talent of Goryeo era swordmaster sounds like a joke. He confirms she hasn't told anyone about her talents, and she says it's a cringy name. He says ignorance is truly scary. She asks if he's disappointed in her talent, and begs him not to take the contract back. He says he isn't disappointed. A window then appears asking if he'd like to start his entrance ceremony. He tells her he'll need to step out for a bit, and he doesn't know how long, but says it won't be too long. Then he asks her what equipment she uses. She says she uses a shield, and he asks why she doesn't use a weapon. She says since her strength is strong she thought it would be best to be a frontliner. He asks what she used during training, and she says a spear since it had a long reach and she'd stay safe. He wonders why she picked anything up but a sword. He tells her to go exchange the shield for a sword, and then go find somewhere and practice swinging. Then she'll see how good her swordmaster talent is. He tells her to make sure to practice. She tells him to wait, but he vanishes. Then a while later, we see her holding a sword wondering if she'll even learn by doing this. Since she's never swung one before, she just goes crazy swinging. But she feels that something feels different. She wonders what the feeling is. She says she's never felt like this before. She keeps swinging, and is mesmerized. Yu Yun appears saying it took longer than he thought, and he wonders how she's doing. He sees her swinging, and says her form is steady. Even though she hasn't been taught, and it's not just for no reason she was called the Sword Empress. She then notices he's there, asking when he got there. He asks if he's in the way. He says he didn't want to bother her since she was so focused. He then sees he has a mission for a promotion, and it's asking him to create a library. Hiram asks what he's doing, and he says he's thinking of making a library. She says isn't that what tellers usually do first? Then he tells her he just started working as one. She says he looks like a veteran, and he asks her what he'd gain from lying to her. He then sees a thing to name his library, but when he clicks it, he sees it's just a list of cliché manhwa titles. He wonders if he needs to name it like this to get attention, and he sees one of the guys has already started on his story Food the Library. He clicks on it to see someone being crushed to death by evil beings, and is getting flamed by the constellations. He decides to name it later to just create the library for now. He asks if she's ready to swing her sword. Then they teleport to the top of a building. He tells her it's an entrance to the world of thoughts, and asks if she's aware that the tellers write stories after making contracts. And they show their stories to the constellations. Then he asks her if she knows what the stories entail. She says it's the life of the character. He says kinda. But the constellations are all different, so the genre for every story is different too. And the stories that get the most attention are heroic tales. And she will now become the main character of a heroic tale. She asks if she can do it, and he tells her she's got this. He explains they are in the Anvar mountain, specifically a cobalt mine. He asks if she knows what they are, and she says a bit. He then opens his library, and we see constellations start to enter it. He welcomes them all, and introduces himself. They were the ones giving negative reviews in the other room. He realizes they want him to fail. He tells Hiram he'll be heading to the observer room to show the constellations her story, so she'll be fighting alone. She's hella scared. He tells her to swing like she was doing earlier. And a kobold appears. He tells her just to believe in herself. She freezes up saying even if he tells her that she is afraid. It attacks at her, but she avoids it. The kobold continues attacking at her, and she screams asking for help. She trips and falls down, saying that she's going to die at this rate, and starts to shiver. She recalls how everyone treated her, saying she is strength but is trash, and how she should be a civil servant instead. Their ridicule heavily affected her. She really wondered if she could continue like this. And wonders if she should run away, but she says she cannot do it since if she does she'll remain useless. She thinks about how Yu Young offered her a contract, and if she fails him she won't be able to face him. He shouts telling her to dodge, as the kobold jumps straight at her. She resolves herself, and blocks its attack with her sword. We see blood on her face, as she's counterattacked it, slicing the kobold in half. The constellations are shocked by this, and so is Yu Yun. Hiram says she'll no longer be afraid of fighting. Yu Yun says that's it, that's how you use a sword. A golden energy comes out from the kobold, and flies into her, saying she's earned 7 TP. It then starts to set in that she did it, and she's excited, saying she actually did it. He compliments her, but warns her the fight isn't over. He says the world is full of things that will bring her joy, so she cannot stop here, and tells her to desire more and greed for it. He asks if she can do it, she tells him yes. 3 more kobold leap at her, and of course we don't get to see it. Sad, it jumps to someone seeing how Yu Yun's library has 15 viewers. It's a senior associate teller named Totten. He says this makes no sense, even if a department is backing him. But since he's a newbie with this many viewers, he must be doing something dirty. Totten sees something, he begins to sweat after seeing it. And we see that he's wondering who Hiram is. She doesn't have any gear on, and her weapon is ordinary. He's seen many collectors, but this one is stronger than he's ever seen. She is growing stronger every minute. Yu Yun says she's getting adjusted to her ability. He tells the Constellations that this is her first battle. He tells them that she can do even more than this. Hiram calls out to him. She asks him what this is in front of her. She sees a red line. He tells her that it's the border, and beyond it isn't the farming area. It's something the collectors agreed on making in order to bring in more points. She starts to lower her sword. Totten says she's already reached the border, and it's impressive for her first time. Yu Yun asks Hiram if she's disappointed. Yeah, since it's over. He says it isn't over, and since they are here they might as well go to the end. She asks what he means, and he tells her she'll clear the entire mind realm. We learn they can be eliminated from reality if they are cleared, and once it is cleared a new one will appear elsewhere. Nobody can figure out the story without entering it, so people hesitate to enter them. Which is why people suggest not to clear them. She asks him if it's truly okay, and he asks her what the problem is. Saying she can just say he made her do it, plus it looks like she doesn't want to stop here. She asks if it's that obvious, then says she'll do as he says. He tells all the Constellations to cheer her on. Totten says what is she trying to do, and there's no way she'll cross the border. She quickly leaps through it, and Totten is surprised she actually did it. He says she must be out of her mind, since they are banned from entering. The view count increases further. Yu Young starts to explain how people used to be more interested in the mind realms, but with the borders up the Constellations all lost interest. And they started an apocalypse to try and get an interesting story. Since he knows how the world ends, this world needs to change, not by the intervention of an outsider, but on its own. The view count increases more, then Yu Young tells her that she's done well, and now they are at the deepest levels. She instantly looks super excited to see him. That's cute. He tells her they are almost there, so why doesn't she take a break? She says okay, since she was getting tired. He says she got this far due to her special talents, but her body can't keep up with it. He asks her how the sword felt. She says it was the best and she wishes she started out with it. He notices the book above her head is brighter, so something has changed inside her. He tells her this is the last level, then asks if she remembers the kobolds that ran off earlier. She says yes, and he tells her they are probably waiting for her and probably have a leader due to how they moved as a group. He says she can stop here if she wants. She laughs, saying he's kidding, right? She says she came this far, it's only fair she sees it through, and he's not going to play dumb after making her cross the border, right? He says of course not, and asks if they'll continue. She says of course. He smiles, saying he was planning to convince her not to go if she hesitated, but guess she's really determined. He tells her they should set a goal, asking if she knows how to clear a mind realm. She says yes, and he says okay, good. The mind realm's clearing condition is to clear it out, so killing all the kobolds will be good, but she'll need to aim for the leader first. He says there are all kind of ways to clear mind realms, but this one is simple. She's glad to hear it, and starts humming, asking if they should get going. He says they should swap her weapon first. She asks why, then looks down to see her blade is destroyed. He says it'll break if they continue, but it held up well. She starts to cry, asking what now. He says she earned a lot of points so far, so he's picked out the best options. She asks if there isn't a discount. He tells her needs to make a living too. She clicks, saying goodbye to all her points, then gets a sword. Now she has no points remaining. He tells her it looks great. She complains about her points, and he tells her to earn them again. Further in the cave we see the leader of the kobolds, and some henchmen. Then Hiram says it's all their fault, that her sword broke. They can tell she's angry, then she leaps at them, yelling at them. She crashes into the ground, and starts killing them. Asking if they know how hard she worked to get those points, she turns and spots the boss, then leaps at him. He's low-key afraid, then she cuts his head off in one strike. And now has officially cleared the cobalt mines. It cuts to a cafe, and she screams whoa. We see her pigging out, saying it's so good. He asks her if it's really that good, and she says yes, and she's glad to have earned so many points from clearing the mines. He tells her she's overreacting, and she can eat this anytime she wants if she keeps it up. She asks him if he's serious. He says it's up to her how she uses her points, but she'll get fat if she eats cake daily. She comments on how that's rude, then says he knew about her special trait, and asks him what the Goryeo Aegis Swordmaster talent truly is. He asks if she knows about Chikyoung Yang. We learn that he was a low-class military officer, and a civil servant. He alone climbed a castle wall, and cleared it out. He fought thousands of enemies, and slayed them all. He was rumored to have surpassed the human limits, and had the nickname of the Goryeo Aegis Swordmaster. She's surprised he's that great, saying his story could have been made into a drama. He tells her that his friend had a weird name. She asks what it was. He tells her he doesn't want to say it, so she begs him. He says no, and that's sexual harassment. She asks how that makes sense. And he tells her to look it up herself. She starts to Google it, then blushes immediately. She throws the phone at him, saying it's sexual harassment. The guy's name is Long Dong. He asks why she's taking it out on him. He tells her that's why they never published his story. But her talent is stronger than she thinks. She gets embarrassed, and he wonders where the future sword empress is. Questioning if it was all an act. He grabs her wrist, saying they can't loiter, and they need to continue their plans. She asks him what he means, saying she still hasn't finished her cake. It jumps to later, and she's asking him if it's really okay. He tells her it looks great, and she should be more confident. He asks if she remembers what he said earlier. She says not to laugh stupidly and be careful how she acts in front of the constellations. He mentions how there's more viewers now, asking if word spread already. The constellations are surprised, and Yu Eung says it makes sense, as they've never seen Hiram so dressed up. He says if they were to do a survey asking what's the most important part of a character, people would say strength. However, if you ask the second most important thing, they would say something like leadership. But Yu Eung says he would say it's about looks. The constellations are swooning over her. He says before they enter the mind realm she should learn this. He says it's a story he bought earlier, asking if she's ever heard of one. She says yes, but never seen one. He says that her talent is great, but it isn't enough to handle all the issues. Stories here are how they earn skills. She starts to absorb it and he asks her how it feels. She says it feels refreshing. He says it's a good reaction and usually collectors have a hard time taking even two in. She asks him about the stories, asking whose points he used. He instantly changes the topic, saying they should go show the constellations a good show. They enter the mind realm. She asks him where it is, and he says what did they talk about before. She quickly changes her demeanor, and he laughs trying to keep it in. He says it's the labyrinth of Crete. There's been a couple attempts, but it remains uncleared. She asks why that is, and he says they weren't able to figure out the clear conditions. She peeks around the corner to see a corpse riddled with arrows. He tells her not to make a sound. And based on their decomposition they must have entered recently. He sees that there are now 100 viewers, and there are even tellers in his library too. It's obvious they are trying to steal ideas since it's doing so well, but they can watch all they want. This is just to build regular viewers. Hands her a spool of thread, and he says it's a maze that's complicated. And in the myths Theseus used thread to get out of a maze, so she should too. He leaves, saying he wishes her well. She looks a bit worried, then he tells her to just keep pushing forward, as if it's nothing more than a trivial matter. She says okay, and we see some donations happen. She starts walking down the labyrinth. Yu Eung says even if she doesn't notice it, her mental fortitude is way above the average collector. Since she isn't panicking after seeing all of the corpses, she turns a corner and sees a bright light. She wonders what it is, and Yu Eung tells her to wait. But it's too late as she's face to face with a minotaur. It growls loudly, then goes to attack her. We hear the sound of it hitting something, and Yu Eung yells out to her. The minotaur grunts, then feels a sudden pain as we see Hiram slice across its chest. The wound begins to pour blood, and she says tonight's dinner will be cow head soup. The constellations wonder what cow head soup is, and he wishes she didn't say something so corny. He warns her the minotaur is way stronger than a cobalt. She keeps attacking it, and he says the skin is thick so it'll be hard to kill it in one go, so she should do a hit and run tactic, tire it out then finish it. He asks her if she's listening to him, then realizes she has no intention of backing off from this. She dodges its attack, and lands on the floor. He then notices that her sword begins to glow, and says this is nuts. Since she's using sword aura right now, he explains that sword aura is when people reach a certain threshold with the sword, but I'm sure most people here know what it is, but he says that most collectors don't learn it on their own and instead acquire it through a story. But Hiram developed it all on her own. She and the Minotaur yell at each other, and she slashes it in the head, causing it to be immediately launched backward, and we see that she destroyed the floor from her attack too. She stares at its corpse, and gets spammed with donations. She is excited. Young says he didn't even have to do anything, and the number of constellations doubled. They are growing really fast. Hiram says something is weird, and he asks what's wrong. She says that she killed the Minotaur, but the mind realm isn't cleared yet. He says that's because it wasn't the clear condition. He says everyone must be curious as to why it hasn't been cleared. It's because it isn't cleared by defeating the Minotaur. Many collectors in his past life tried it that way, but none of them succeeded, since they didn't figure out the real method. He tells her the way to clear it is to escape it. She says then she just needs to follow the yarn back. He tells her that would take her to the entrance, not the exit. She asks where it is then. He looks up, and she asks if he means the ceiling. He asks if she knows the story of Daedalus. She says yes. He says it's a genius inventor, so much so he created this complex structure, but someone escaped when they weren't meant to be able to. She says he means Theseus, right? He says yeah, and since Daedalus told him the method of using yarn. King Minos trapped Daedalus and his son Icarus here, but they still found a way to escape. She seems excited, and he says there are feathers scattered all around the place. She runs off saying she knows what to do, and gathers a lot of feathers. Then says this should be enough. Then she asks what this is, and he congratulates her as she's acquired Icarus's wings, which let her fly once a day. He asks why she's just staying dazed, and to do what he said earlier. She says that is really lucky, and she gets a ton of TP, and donations. Back at her apartment, she seems very proud of herself, and the wings. He says they look great, and she says that she is a full-fledged collector now, and considering the points they earn she's not the same as before. He tells her to stop posing, and she blows him a kiss saying her charm works on the constellations. So how can he pretend not to like her? He barks at her saying to stop. She calls him mean, then he asks if she went to the association. She says not yet, and asks why. He says she needs to update her class, as she can't stay in class 9 forever. And she needs to go higher if she wants to earn money. She immediately starts to fly out saying to wait for her. He tells her to wait. At the association, people are taken aback and keep talking about how pretty she is. He tells her not to show her wings off, and she nervously says she didn't have the thought. At the desk, the receptionist asks what he can do for them. Young tells him he's here to claim the reward for clearing the mental realm. They start to talk about how 2 were cleared recently, and wonder if she's the one who did it. Some of them even start to say they won't last long with their selfish attitudes of ignoring the barriers. The receptionist asks if anyone else helped her, and Young says she did it solo. They all say that's a damn lie, and the receptionist asks about her rank. He tells her she's rank 9, and he says he'll get someone else, so wait. They start to talk about how they thought she would be a class 5 at least, and a 9 clearing a mental realm is a lie. Young is glad she seems fine, and a man approaches them, asking why they are coming in here, lying through their teeth. He says it's a joke a woman like her cleared a mental realm. She stares at him, and doesn't answer. He gets mad that she isn't giving him a reply, and starts throwing more shade at her. She still doesn't answer, and he raises his fists, asking if she's still going to ignore him. Young says she clearly doesn't want to talk. The man asks why her manager is butting in, saying to mind his own business. He says he'd prefer to be her colleague, and the man calls him a con artist. He says he doesn't know where he came from, but unless he wants to be beaten up he needs to get the hell out of here. He says he doesn't want to. The man gets ready to hit him, and Young warns him about Hiram. He ignores it and swings at him, but she grabs him by the arm and stops him. The man says she better let go while he's being nice. Then we hear a loud bang and see that she slams him into the floor. The dude turns into Yamcha, but I'm sure he'll walk it off. Young says he told him that he needed to be careful. The dude wonders what's going on, saying there's no way such a small woman did this to him. He gets up and screams while going to hit her. Everyone is afraid that she's going to be hit. Then they see her put him back on the floor again. They say he's a class 7, so how is he losing to a class 9? The man gets angrier, as he realizes Yu Young planned this from the start. He starts to get up with Hiram still on his back. The bystanders wonder if they are actually planning to fight here. The man says that he won't forgive her, and will show her his strength. And that he's going to rip Yu Young's smirk off his face. Hiram tells him to stay still and kicks him further into the ground. The dude is in denial, and Yu Young says it looks like she mastered one of the skills on her own, that lets her increase her body weight by using aura. She looks at him and begins to blush. The bystanders begin to realize she's stronger than a class 9, and some men in suits come over asking what's going on. Saying fights aren't allowed here, and asks who started this all. Yu Young says with how late they are intervening someone must have wanted to watch all of that. Another man walks up asking why they are fighting here, asking if they think they are a joke. Yu Young asks the man if he's in charge here. The man says yes, asking who he is. Yu Young says he's the colleague of the person involved in the incident, and there's been a misunderstanding. They didn't fight, but had a slight conflict of opinion. And the man just acted out on his own, so Hiram had to apprehend him. It was just self-defense. The man asks if that's really the case. Yu Young says to look at Hiram's demeanor she is peaceful, and has no injuries. He says if anything the man should be thankful they solved it. The bystanders say it's true, they didn't start the fight. The boss dude says he apologizes. Yu Young says she just needs to receive her rewards, and asks when the person in charge will show up. The man says that he's the guy, and he's sorry for being a bit late. Then says he'd like to have a word separately. He says okay and tells Hiram to follow. The bystanders say she's really pretty, and Yu Young is glad her debut went so smoothly, but now it's time to mooch off everything the association has. He mentions how the dude in charge has a bright silver book above his head, so he won't be an easy person to deal with. And even just now the man wanted to pressure them, but changed his attitude immediately. And that isn't a talent, but it's based on the experience he's made over time. He opens a door, and guides them in. He introduces himself as Choi Jaongmo. He says he holds a lot of responsibility here. Yoon Hyung introduces himself and Hiram. They talk about how she solo cleared the mind realm, and Jaongmo says that's unbelievable. He says everyone thought that until she showed her abilities. Jaongmo says that's true, and asks what he wants from them. Yu Young says he speaks quite strangely, and all they want are their rewards. Then asks if he's planning to not give them. He awkwardly laughs, saying he isn't responsible for approving decisions. Young says he thought he was in charge. He apologizes, and Yu Young says he had an idea that the association wouldn't give a proper reward for her clear, and doesn't want to beat around the bush. And what is important is that they don't want to give them rewards, and they should speak properly from here on out. We already know how if a mind realm is cleared there won't be a new one added. Because of this, the government and collectors all accepted not clearing it. Jaongmo says he's being quite blunt, and says they've made the situation hard to manage, and asks if they are aware of that. Yu Young says yes, and the reason the mind realms exist is to tell stories to the constellations and prove their values as collectors. But now when you look at how people are acting, they are going against that. Jaongmo says that's untrue, and if a new mind realm is created it'll take a lot of money and people to analyze it, which may lead to many deaths, so they keep the mind realm normal to prevent the loss of lives. Yu Young says it's just an excuse. This angers Jaongmo and he asks if he'll take responsibility for those who die. Yu Young asks why he'd need to when they are doing their jobs as collectors. Not only are they not getting rewards, now they are being asked to take responsibility. If they die or not is their own fault. Jaongmo barks at him more, saying to watch his words. Just because it's unrelated to him, it doesn't mean to take it lightly. Yu Young questions him about people's lives being on the line, and says it's laughable since they'll all die at this rate anyways. He say leaving the mind realm because they are afraid will solve nothing, which is why they acted. Collectors are rotten and only think about their own safety. The man asks if he's different. Young says yes, he won't hide or stop others. Jaongmo laughs, asking if he believes he needs to be rewarded for that, and no matter what he says it won't change how society is and how it functions. Yu Young asks if he isn't afraid of the aftermath. Jaongmo asks what the two of them alone can do. He says it may just seem like that, but he asks how he thinks the others will react. Jaongmo asks what others he means. Then we hear the good old window sound, and he looks up to see countless windows, about how the constellations are furious. Yu Young says he forgot to mention it, but he's a storyteller from Celestial Bodies Incorporated, then welcomes him to his library. What a chat. If you've watched till the end comment, worm, to let me know. Subscribe for more videos like this, leave a like or a comment to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.